Okay, so what happened is that when I put out the call for presentations, Professor Franz of Cambridge, who was with us in 2011 and last year and also 2012, he replied to me that and said that he was sorry he couldn't make it this time because he's still teaching at Cambridge. But if I wanted to, he could send two of his employees that are working on the PICO project. And he said one of them even has a PhD in psychology. And I said, ooh, yeah, that would be really interesting because having a psychologist in here to talk about passwords would also add another dimension or another level into our understanding or misunderstanding of passwords. And then Jeunese shows up and it's like, okay, I'm sorry I'm having to say this, but this is like a wet dream come true. We actually have a psychologist at the conference. And didn't mean anything more than that about it, of course. I've said enough. So, Jeunese?
Yeah, okay, so as Per already said, I'm Jeunese and I'm not a computer scientist, I'm a psychologist. My undergraduate degree was in psychology, my PhD was in applied psychology and human-computer interaction. And I now work with Dr. Staiano and colleagues, one of whom's over there, called Chris, at the University of Cambridge on the PICO project. And the problem that we're trying to solve is how to replace passwords because they're very complex and there are very many of them, or you're supposed to have very many of them. So I'm just going to move on. So by far the most dominant form of authentication is passwords. And this is fine in principle if you could just pick one password, but the fact is that so the password has to be easy and it has to for people to use it, and it shouldn't be reusable. But people do reuse it, and they are asked to pick quite complicated ones. But the fact that means that passwords have become impractical from a usability standpoint and vulnerable to attacks from a security standpoint. And the most obvious usability challenges with passwords is that you have to have a different password for each account and that they should be sufficiently long and complex with a combination of numbers, symbols, and letters. So moreover, because users tend to be inaccurate about their perceptions of security, they tend to undermine system security by choosing passwords that are very crackable. And so this is because, unlike the typical computer geek, and that's you guys here, the typical user values usability more than they value security. So before I move forward, I'm going to give you 30 seconds to try and memorize this 12-letter sequence here. You ready? Don't write it down. Don't cheat. Don't take a picture. No. Okay, so we've established what the main issues are, but what about the why? By establishing some of the psychological issues that underlie why users choose passwords that are weak, then we can capitalize on their abilities rather than working against them. And these are the psychological phenomena that I'm going to talk about. They're not the only psychological phenomena I could talk about, and they are quite closely related, but I think they're the most relevant to what I'm talking about here anyway. So first I'm going to ask you if you could tell me what the 12-letter sequence of letters I asked you to remember was. Can anybody tell me? I'm going to go with you first because you were first, hand up. BWSELOHWAER. Yes. So how did you remember that? No, you said, what did you say again?
The end was WAER.
Yeah. Yeah, that's correct. So how did you remember that? What did you do to remember that?
Black and white.
Mm-hmm.
And then just cello, and then where, but I knew that it was a bit funky different.
Right, so you used a technique called, which is down here, contextual association. So when we get to that, I'll describe that. So you nevertheless likely found it difficult, even though you did it correctly, and I'm sure other people did it correctly too. The difficulty you likely experienced trying to remember the sequence is very much in line with how the human mind works, and in particular how working memory works. And with working memory, the problem with passwords isn't their length, but their complexity, which means that, where am I? Oh, what am I doing? Soz. I'm in the right place now, sorry, I got lost. Okay, so ideally they should be non-words consisting of random sequences of letters, numbers and symbols, so that they're not guessable or brute forceable. And there are two main methods for trying to recall a sequence of items that don't make up words. And the first is chaining, where you associate each item cues the next item, and then you've got contextual association, where you associate each item in a series with a context that provides an ordinal cue as well. So that's those two. But the main issue here is that memory span for words is always going to be better than memory span for non-words. So even when you use serial recall techniques here, it's not necessarily going to be easy to remember truly random passwords. And just to demonstrate how non-words are worse than words, these are the same letters I showed you before, they're just in a different order now. And now it's a word I'm sure you'd be able to recall it easily.
The other spelling was the Welsh word for wheelbarrow.
Was it now? Damn it. There weren't any Welsh people in the room, though. Okay. Okay, so perhaps if users only had to remember one random sequence of letters, it wouldn't really be a problem. But in reality, users have to remember tens of passwords, and they're asked to make each one unique as well. So that's not really much good. Move on, please. There we go. Okay, so these requirements are not met because people are much better at remembering the meaning of a password than they are at remembering the superficial details that make up a password. So unfortunately for the user, it's usually not enough to type in a password almost correctly, so long as it has the same meaning or it has a similar spelling. And this is my cat Alfie, just to clarify. And that is not my password, just to also clarify. Okay, so instead, passwords must be entered verbatim, which requires knowledge of the account, which structure of which password you need, and as well as it not being easy to type in passwords accurately when you don't have the visual feedback, you usually have wee stars or wee dots. Details, unlike the meaning, tend to fade quickly and are susceptible to interference. And so to demonstrate this point, I'm going to ask you to try and remember as many details from this picture as possible. And again, I'm going to give you 30 seconds.
We were the victims of the same kind of experiment last year.
Yeah. Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm not that sorry.
Wait, was the details over the picture?
Oh, just try and take in as much of the picture as possible. You only got 5 seconds though. And that's that. Okay, so what was the picture of? An angel and cherub. What were they doing? Yeah.
They were depressed because the passwords have been compromised.
Okay. Right, so you got the gist meaning, that's fine. Now for the details. Are you ready? How many rungs on the ladder could you see? 7. No cheating. I'm gonna make you guys put down on your laptops. Okay, true or false? The baby in the picture had wings. Well, you already said cherub, so that kind of gives away that answer. What inanimate objects could you see in the picture? Lots. Ladder, yes, correct. Yeah. It's unlikely that all of you are going to remember all the items, so you're all saying different items, but there's only 1 or 2 that you each can remember, and I didn't think that one through. So, how many squares made up the panel of numbers above Melancholia's head? Well done. There was a devil in the picture, true or false?
Yes.
And how many nails were on the floor next to her feet? this is the picture again. So there was no devil, I'm afraid. There were 4 nails at her feet. A lot of people said to me, what nails? I was hoping for that, it was not worked out. Okay, so okay, so this is what the picture looked like. It's related to the final memory issue I'm going to talk about, and then you're free of all the memory tests. That is the difference between recognition and recall. But before that, I am actually going to ask you to close anything that you have internet access with, because I don't want you to cheat for the next one. Like, I mean it, like, do it. Or else. I see this computer open, that computer open, that one's still open, that one's very much open. You're not even trying to hide it, man. Close your computer. I'm not going to take answers from you. You can. Yeah, everybody hands up in the air. Right, okay, right. Oh, God, right. Okay, so, unsurprisingly, words are easier to recall than non-words. I've already demonstrated that. But more surprisingly, both words and non-words are equally easier to recognize than recall. So if passwords are supposed to meet regulations, which, a random sequence of numbers, letters, and symbols, how are we expected to recall them when recognition is better? And I'm going to demonstrate this by asking you to tell me in what order the Google colours appear. And I'm helping you because I've got the 4 colours there. It's just not in order.
Blue.
Does it?
Yes. Starts with red. Yeah. Starts with blue. She is blue.
No, you can't. Nobody? Oh, go on. Sure. Okay, fine. Okay, which of these is correct?
Right one.
Yeah. Right, so recognition is better than recall is my point. Okay, so now we are on to security-related issues. The security risks that people are willing to take are largely dependent on the slowly evolved heuristics that we have evolved as a human species. And the fact is that the social and technological advances outpace our slowly evolved heuristics for perceiving risks in our environment. So, what example do I give? Okay, so attacks from a predator like this guy here, or a shark in modern day, is more vivid and more gruesome than the more abstract attack over here, which is a cyber attack. So it's more salient in their minds, which means people overestimate how probable this one is than that one. Yeah, because people are affected by salient occurrences, from 9/11 to shark attacks, which I've already said, rare events in modern society seem more probable, and this particular heuristic that I was just describing there is called the availability heuristic. And there are several examples of the availability heuristic, and probably the most notable is that people seem to be more afraid of flying than they are of driving a car, even though you're more likely to crash a car than you are to ever be in a plane crash. And the reason for that is that plane crashes tend to be reported on in the media. They also have quite gruesome outcomes. And it's the same for people are more scared of like random acts of terror than they are intimate violence in the home, even though intimate violence in the home is far more likely to happen. And you've got others like people were scared of bird flu far more than they were scared of normal flu, even though normal flu killed way more people than bird flu did. Okay, so that's availability heuristic. People are also subject to a control bias, where they think that things that are in their control, there's less risk associated with it. For example, getting on a plane, you're not in control of flying that plane. Getting in the car, you're in control of driving the car. So password security 2 is very much in the user's perceived control, making users more likely to underestimate the risks associated with weak passwords. And people are often victims of the endowment effect, and I'm going to demonstrate this by asking you to think about how you'd answer the following question. You don't actually have to answer it, so you can pretend you got it right. Okay, so imagine a disease outbreak that is expected to kill 600 people. Choose between these 2 alternative treatment programs. Program A, 200 people will be saved. Program B, there is a 1/3 probability that 600 people will be saved and a 2/3 probability that no people will be saved. Have you guys got an answer in your head? You can tell me if you want. No? Okay. Okay, so A and B have the same utility. The only difference is that A is a sure thing and B is a risk. Oh, wrong way. And more people tend to choose program A over program B. If you think about these two options now, though, 400 people will die, and there is a 1/3 probability that no one will die, and a 2/3 probability that 600 people will die. Which one would you then choose?
People just do not want to read more text.
I read it out for you. Like I did all the work.
That's too complex.
Okay, well, okay, that. Okay, so the only difference between these two options here in A and B was that A and B were presented in terms of gains, so how many lives saved, and C and D are presented in terms of how many lives are lost. And so despite this, though, it's the other way around. More people will choose program D than program C. And what this means is that people tend to be more risk aversive when it comes to gains, and more willing to risk losses than they are to risk gains anyway. So in terms of password security, this implies that people are going to be happy to risk some level of security associated with guessable or brute forceable passwords, and unhappy to risk perceived usability gains associated with poor password practices. Not that there's any direct research done on this, so this is like an open area. Aside from being poor at evaluating the probability of risk, people are poor at evaluating the severity of risk. And so, as well as overestimating the probability of more spectacular events, people underestimate the probability of bad things happening to them at all. So, things like smoking or eating badly have less immediate consequences, which also makes it less solid in your mind. So, for example, if I were to eat a cupcake and it immediately went here, I would stop eating cupcakes, but because I can convince myself it's not that bad, I continue to eat them. So these are familiar and common risks that don't have immediate consequences. And it's important because if people are getting the severity of risk wrong, then they're getting the security usability trade-off wrong. And what's worse is that knowledge doesn't change behavior. And so we like to believe that the more information we give users, the better they'll behave, but that's just not true. And governments continue to try and believe that too, with constant campaigns about stop smoking, it hurts you, and stop eating badly, it hurts you, drive with a seatbelt because that doesn't hurt you, and it doesn't work, basically. And this is because people rely on an optimism bias, which is when people believe that they'll do better than other people who are engaged in the exact same activity. And that's the sort of reason why people don't always think, cancer happens to other people, diabetes happens to other people, car crashes happen to other people, because of this optimism bias. This heuristic is one possible reason for ignoring security risks even after you've heard about a security risk elsewhere. And the typical view of passwords is also supported by confirmation bias, which is when you seek out information that matches your beliefs and ignore information that doesn't match your beliefs, which means that people are likely to say, well, I've never been hacked, and use that as evidence for their behavior until they do get hacked, and then all of a sudden they'll change their passwords, but probably not to something majorly more secure. This shows, I've got a study here that was done in the 60s, but it's really simple. And what they did is they gave participants a deck of cards, and for half the participants, the deck of cards had 30% happy faces and 70% frowning, and vice versa for the other half. And participants were more accurate, so they had to guess what card was coming next before they saw it. And participants were more accurate when there was 70% happy cards than 70% frowning faces. And what this shows is that users' preference or people's preference for positive things makes them less accurate about negative things. So if people don't value security guidelines and they can't follow them anyway, what alternative could we offer? Whatever the alternative, it has to be in line with users' goals. And the everyday user is probably less concerned with authentication and more concerned with just signing into Facebook really quickly. So, or any other account or service that you have. So, the proposed solution from the Pico team is Pico, obviously. But there are other ones, so you've got other password types, fastword, graphical passwords, associative passwords, biometrics, and other hardware tokens. what Pico is an authentication scheme that was originally presented by Stiano in 2011. It is a small dedicated device that remembers your credentials for you. So you've got from 25 passwords to just the one device. It doesn't have to, I mean, it can take on any form. It can take on a form from a key fob to a watch. It doesn't have to take on this form, but what it does need to have is a camera to take a picture of a QR code, a display for choosing between accounts, and a main button for selecting an account, and a pairing button for pairing an account with your Pico. The main usability benefits are there's less of an impact on memory, less actual physical effort, and it's scalable for users. So, okay, so users also do not have to worry about theft, and that's because they carry with them devices called Pico siblings that create like an aura of you-ness around yourself that tells the Pico whether or not you're near, and only unlocks when you're near. That you there should also be an orange. I failed. Oh well. Yeah, so the Pico siblings share a cryptic. This is how it works. In my knowledge as a psychologist, the Pico siblings share a cryptographic key, and when there's a sufficient number of them near the Pico, then the Pico unlocks. So there are also other security benefits. It's continuous authentication, and then resistance to guessing, phishing, and keylogging. Before I invite any questions, yes, I know it's ambitious, but that's precisely why I'm doing it. I'm going to let you read the quote. Done. Okay, questions. I'm a little bit early, I apologise.
Could you go back to the other Rosebox quote?
Yeah. I just like my quotes.
Thank you.
Okay. Yes, sorry.
Your optimism bias,
Yeah.
is that actually statistically true that bad stuff happens to other people?
No.
Isn't it?
Yes, it is.
No.
There's so many other people compared to just me.
I suppose. No, but okay, optimism bias is something that we've evolved, because if you started to see the world for what it actually was, you wouldn't bother. I honestly think that that's true. Like, obviously, that's not the academic answer, but that's what they mean when they say that. I can't even find it. It was right there. There we go. So yeah, it makes sense for you to believe things are going to turn out well. Otherwise, you wouldn't keep, chasing the mammoth or looking for berries.
Well, that's how politicians get
Yeah,
power.
yeah. Politicians use all sorts of psychology.
Parts of this, we pretty much know that.
Mhm.
I mean, people have to get compromised before they will.
Yeah,
do
but
any
I'm just saying
additional
that there's a
steps
psychological
into-
reason for it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm also curious about it. At least from my perspective, I also feel that. I mean, I've been working for IT's outsourcing provider for many years,
Mhm.
until a year ago, and I have done many security audits where I have asked companies and people, why haven't you written any kind of description of what kind of security you want or need? And the answer has usually been, well, we are outsourcing to somebody we believe to be a professional provider of services. So we expect them to have much better security than we ever had. So we don't see any point in trying to tell them what kind of security we need or want, because we just assume they will be delivering good security.
Mm-hmm.
That's also kind of, it could be narrowed down to something as simple as, my mother tells me that as long as the system allows me to use password 1 as my password,
Mm-hmm.
the system means it's good enough. And
They could
then
just be
I'm done.
passing responsibility as well, just so they're not responsible for any security breaches. Somebody else with more knowledge than you should tell you better. Is the logic that they're using, and if you don't follow that, then well, I wasn't told to do anything else. It's a good one as well. Question? Was there a question in there?
Questions?
Yeah.
Would it be likely to actually change any of this kind of behaviour in the foreseeable
Because I mean, this is tightly linked to evolution,
Mm.
pure biology.
If you played on the right heuristics, yeah.
So
Um,
what are those then?
I think I had one. Just left my head. I was going to say something.
Because I mean, the media, they're and various governments
Mhm.
are quite into the whole "oh, be very afraid"
Yeah.
scenario.
The problem is that the government's focusing on knowledge, but when it actually comes to behaviour change, or according to the theory of planned behaviour, there's three things that affect your attention to change your behaviour, and the first is subjective norms, so what everybody else is doing around you. The second is your attitude towards it, so whether or not you perceive the behaviour to be positive or negative. And the third is what's been added recently and is quite important, is perceived behavioural control. So how much control do you perceive yourself to have? So for example, if I wanted to get fit, yeah, it's a positive outcome. I view it positively, but I don't view the effort positively. I view that negatively. If all my friends were doing it, it might, encourage me to do it a bit sooner. And if I thought, oh, but the gym's really expensive and I don't have any gym stuff and, I don't want to be judged, and then that would, reduce it. So you have to consider all those three things. And surprisingly, knowledge isn't really in that model. It's attitude. You need to affect people's attitude, not feeding them knowledge. People just switch off. I think it's rubbish. A lot of the time, I think people don't trust the government either. Like, why are they giving me this information? So, yeah. If you wanted to change behaviour, I'd probably go with one of the actual attitude behaviour change models, but this is all social psychology. It's all heuristics and evolutionary.
Let me ask you this, I mean, obviously you're working on a people project, a project that is, trying to replace passwords.
Yeah.
But how should we go about to utilize this to make people create stronger passwords?
I suppose you could scare them and make them think they had been hacked into. That would not be ethical. Okay, so if we go back to give them chocolate, yeah, that would work for me.
But we're inherently resistant to change as well, aren't we?
Yeah.
So that complicates it.
It depends on whether or not you've already changed your behaviour once. If you've already changed it to be, which is unlikely, if you've already changed from a secure password to an insecure password or unsecure password, then you're not going to change it back again because you've gone through some sort of mental process to justify a change. So, depends. If somebody has always used a terrible password and you can convince them to use a good one, it's unlikely they'll go back to using a bad one again.
You sure?
Positive.
Because there are other things like how people are really, really good at falling back into bad habits.
Yeah.
I think it was Dan Cable, psychology professor.
I'm talking about significant attitude change.
Yeah, exactly. And he quoted a study that said, I think more than 60% of patients that had undergone serious heart surgery
Go
after
back
a
to
year,
eating,
they
yeah.
go back to all their bad habits.
I'm talking about, for example, I used to be a Christian, and then I went for a major attitude change, not just being a teenager. I mean, I went through a major change and decided I was an atheist. Now, it'd be extremely difficult to change me back into being a believer, just because I already was one. I already went through the cognitive processes to make that change. So for something major like that, somebody can't justify just flipping between those two major things back and forth. For something like eating badly, it's easy to just slowly slip back into it, whereas something like your religion, what you tell people you are, is a little bit more serious, I suppose.
But what you're saying is that for some changes, we haven't really gone through that process at all.
No, there's no,
So
it's just like I wish I didn't have a belly, rather than I wish I was fitter and I could run up the stairs and I could do this and I could do that. It's different.
how do you induce that kind of change?
Dunno. Yes?
Yeah, because back to your point, people just creating a password there and then because you're challenging them, you're standing in front of them.
I suppose you could get them to use the technique where you have like a sentence and then you get them to just, do the beginning word of each sentence or whatever, but I don't think you can stop that. The whole point is, I think passwords are crap, so that's why.
Ooh, careful.
Good one.
Got Pico. I like the idea of Pico. Like, even I know, I use terrible tactics for passwords and I know better, but I still do it.
More questions?
A more specific reference question,
Mhm.
really. When you talk about the gains and losses,
Mhm.
you just
No, I didn't come up with that. I got that from this guy here. He's the guy that I quoted here.
yeah.
Got it from him.
But if you jump forward 3 slides, I think. Next one. Or not next. This one.
No, I just created
Then
it, said it was.
When you briefly mentioned
Yeah.
that you weren't sure if it was true because no direct research has been.
Oh, I said I didn't know if it applied to passwords because no direct research has been done on passwords. So if you wanted to see if people were more likely to take risks with passwords if they were presented in terms of loss versus gain, then you might be able to find that out. I was just saying what this research implies is that passwords, people are more likely to choose less secure passwords because that's associated with a loss, and less likely to give up, put at risk the usability benefits of having a weaker password that's easier to type in. That was my point.
But very hard to quantify losses in relation to bad passwords.
Well, yeah, because it's
Versus,
very,
you know, people die.
yeah, that's why it'd be good research, I think. Any more?
Okay. Well, thank you, Jeunese.
Okay.